I've worked at garden centers now for over 20 years of my career, so I decided to put together a little checklist, or a series of questions, if you will, about the dialogue that happens between the customer and the nursery professional when you're trying to decide what tree should I plant. That lists some of the most common questions that customers have when they're picking out their trees. So if you work through this list, this will put you a step ahead when it comes time to pick out that tree for that location you've been thinking about. Number one on our list is hardiness. Now, hardiness refers to the cold temperature average. Will that tree last through the winter? If you look at this zone map here, this is going to give you an idea where you are, where you live, and what the average low temperature is that your plant that you're going to put in is going to tolerate. So if you look at the lower numbers up here on the top part of the list, zone 2 will tolerate upwards of 50 below 0 Fahrenheit. And as you work down through the United States on this map, you can see you're getting into zone 7 and 8 and even down into zone 10 once you get into Mexico. So that's one of the most important things that you want to know, is whether or not that tree is going to survive your winter. I live in that area between zone 3 and 4. I can grow a lot of zone 4 trees, but if I've got a location where I definitely want that tree to have the best chance, I'm going to pick a zone 3 tree, just because we can get test winters that will take out trees. Some of those zone 4 trees can grow for 5-7 years, and all of a sudden we get that 50 below and it's gone. Also, if you live inside a city, you're probably going to be warmer than on the outskirts of that city. I happen to live just a little bit out of town of a smaller city, but I'm betting it's about 8 to 10 degrees warmer if you get into that downtown city. So they can probably grow zone 4 plants reliably. Me, on the outskirts, I have to be careful with that. You can also create microclimates in your yard. If you've got a corner, a south face, you've got brick maybe on your building, that's going to warm up and create a heat sink. Now you're open to growing a little bit more sensitive plants. Number 2 on the list, how large do you want that tree to be eventually? You know, if you've got a small tree, you're in that 6 to 20 feet. A medium-sized tree will put you in that 20 to 40 feet tall. And if you're in that 40 foot to even upwards of 70 feet plus, now you're into a large tree. So that's a main thing to decide. Do I want a small tree, a medium tree, or a large tree? And now it's time to look around and look at some of the different obstructions. Do you have a deck nearby that you don't want that tree to encroach on? Or you may want those branches to cascade over that deck for some shade. Also, if you've got power lines, that's something to consider. You don't eventually want that tree to start mingling with the power lines. That power company is going to come through and just scalp that tree, ruin the form of it. So definitely you're going to want to stick with small trees under power lines. One other thing to consider is whether or not you want your trees to intermingle. If you've got a tree that gets, say, 30 feet wide and you plant your trees 30 feet apart, they're going to just eventually touch. Keep in mind, anytime you look at a label where you've got width and height considerations, they're going to give you an average, but that tree can go beyond that average. Or you might have your tree planted in a location where it may never reach that size. It can depend on the different variables. Other things to factor in is whether or not you're going to be using your tree for screening. You might plant your trees much closer together to create a windbreak or a privacy type wall. Also, most trees are going to be taller than they are wide, but there are some trees that are more shrubby in character, meaning they'll get much wider than they do tall. Amur maple and Tatarian maple are two that fit that category in our region. Number 3 on the list is a question I get often. I would say 50% of the time people want a fast growing tree. Now, I've got nothing against fast growing trees, but keep in mind they're not as strong. Anytime you have a fast growing tree, it's going to have a weaker branch structure. Also, fast growing trees tend to be much shorter lived. They're going to have a short lifespan. So you want to make sure that you're okay with that. That fast growing tree we're talking about, you can see anywhere from 3 to 6 feet. And another downside to a fast growing tree is when you get that much growth, you're going to have a process where it's not going to harden off sufficiently for the winter. So you might get dieback on those fast growing trees, especially when they're young. A slow growing tree like some of the oaks, the hard maples, you're going to have a much stronger wood and you're going to have a tree that lasts a long time. So if you are going to go with fast trees, I always recommend intermix some of the slower growing trees so you have some longevity built in for your landscape. And back to that question, I want a fast-growing tree. It's often said by the customer, you know, I want to see something before I die, and I get that. So do I. But you know what? Plant your trees for the next generation. There's something about that when you have that frame of mind that you're doing this for somebody else. Imagine if you're walking through the park and you see some of the beautiful trees, the setting that you have. It's a good chance somebody planted some of those trees. That's there for you to enjoy. The other perspective I like to mention is enjoy watching your trees grow. That's something that's a favorite part of gardening to me, is watching it grow, just like kids. And plants become like your kids. And number 4 on the list is, what type of soil do you have? This is a question that I'm always going to ask a customer, because you might have sandy soil, you might have clay soil. A lot of trees can tolerate those different soils, somewhere in the middle, and they'll range. But if you start getting into the extremes of pure sand or that heavy clay, now you might want to be sure that you're planting a tree that'll live there long term. I happen to live in a region where we've got a river, Missouri River, running through our area, so we've got some sand down on those bottoms. Then you go west of us and we've got rocky, clay, ranch country, just some of the most awful soil, tough to grow trees on it. And then we've got the loam, if you go east of us, beautiful growing soil. So for us, it varies quite a bit on which tree you can plant, so it's important to know that. Now, typically garden centers or nursery, landscaper type companies in your area, they're going to be selling trees that are hardy for your area, and they are going to tolerate your soil profile. If you buy from the mass merchants or the big box stores, as they're called, be a little bit more careful. They may have trees coming in from other regions that are not suited for the area that you're growing in. A good example for us is the red oaks. Red oak trees will not tolerate the pH in our soil. It's too high. But go just 200 miles to the east of us and you're going to start seeing red oaks established, because the pH has dropped. So pH is also an important part of your soil. The only way to really know what your soil is to get a soil test done. In universities, farmer co-ops, they can do that for you. You're going to find out your pH, whether or not you have salt problems, and you'll also find out what the nutrient level is in your soil. And along the same line of soils that you have, whether or not your soil is wet or dry. If you've got an area that's saturated for long periods, like say over a week, you're going to have a tree that'll probably tolerate those wet conditions. Picture a gutter and a downspout coming off a house. You can eventually get kind of a low spot there. The soil might settle. Now, is that water running off? If it's not, you've got a saturated condition, and a tree may or may not do well in those locations. So look around for that, wet or dry. Dry oftentimes isn't as much of a problem because we can add water. We can supplement the water. If you've got a saturated area, you can't always get it drained out of there. Another tip I'll give you, if you have a saturated area, what you can do is, if you've got a root ball that you're planting from your tree, only plant it halfway down and then mulch or put your soil up the rest of that container. Your tree is going to acclimate better there. You won't rot the root system by being underground, because if you dig a hole in a saturated area, that water will evacuate to that area. So trees need to acclimate, and small seedlings are a good example of this. You can see stands of trees in wet areas. Well, that tree probably germinated from a seed, and then it slowly acclimated to the wet environment. We're taking a tree, plunking it in there, and hoping that it's going to tolerate that water, but you need to give it time. Sunlight is also an important question, whether or not you get sun all day or you've got a shaded condition. Now, normally if you're going to be planting a tree, you probably do have some sun, because you're expecting you're going to need at least probably 10 to 20 feet of space, even on the small end of things. But what if you're planting underneath the canopy of trees and you just want to start getting some smaller trees established under there? Now you are going to have a tree that'll tolerate some shade. So most trees are going to grow in full sun. It's whether or not they'll tolerate that shade. Here again, we come back to the wet example and a small tree establishing. Smaller trees, say in that 2 to 3 foot range, might be a better way to go, because you're going to acclimate to that shaded condition a little bit better than trying to plant a larger tree in there. The other really common question we get is whether or not a tree is messy or low maintenance. Now, leaves, that's just a given. If you want a tree, you're going to have leaves. Whether or not that's messy to you, I don't know. But messy to me is something where you plant a tree maybe next to a swimming pool, and you don't want that spring flower, which could be sticky, falling on the concrete or falling in the pool. Also, some buds, like the poplar group in our area, those buds alone can be sticky, make quite a mess. Can't even sweep them off concrete. You might also want to avoid a flowering crabapple that has persistent fruit that might drop on a sidewalk per se. So those are the type of things that I find messy. Otherwise, to me, leaves aren't messy. They're just part of a tree, and I enjoy all parts of the tree. And along that line of messy or low maintenance, keep in mind some trees can have suckering problems, like in our area, the Canada red cherry, which is a choke cherry variety. You can have those suckers that'll come up in your lawn, they'll come up in your landscape beds where you don't want. Also the aspen trees, especially if there's ever damage where that tree leans a little bit, the roots get severed, you're going to have little aspen trees coming up everywhere. So these are good questions again, to be ready for and ask. If it's something you don't want, that's something you'll want to talk about. It's also important to find out if you've got a tree species that's got serious insect or disease problems. Definitely something to factor in. And we also get a lot of questions on whether or not a tree is going to have a showy spring flower that they can enjoy, or the fall leaf color. That's another big question we get, whether or not a tree is going to have that red fall color. That's what most people are after. And winter interest is another thing that I always try to recommend. Plant a tree that might have some winter interest. A lot of the evergreens, especially say the arborvitae group, you might have some yellow foliage that's evergreen year round, or the spruce trees, the pine trees. That evergreen is awesome off that white winter snow. Not only can you use your garden center as a valuable resource for what type of trees they're going to have, what types are going to work well in your area, looking online, there's so much information available online. I hope this list is helpful for you to start the planning process. You know, questions that should be asked, help you pick out that tree that's going to last for a long time to come. Thanks for watching Garden Hike. We'll see you again next video.